years in the shadows, she had finally found the love and acceptance she'd always craved.
She was hope for a lot of people just speaking out about the trans community.
She's dating someone. She has a boyfriend.
He'd be in and out of town, but the two of them really made an effort to see one another.
After all the struggles she had been going through, she was finally out in the world, publicly living her best life.
But the start of her bright new life is tragically cut short.
Oh my God! Oh my goodness! Somebody killed somebody. She dead.
There were no witnesses. There were no cameras. They were having a very difficult time trying to piece together what had happened.
In the hunt for the killer, detectives find themselves on a winding road of suspects and motivations.
She had actually been brutally assaulted just a month prior.
The video had gone viral, internationally viral.
The FBI had to get involved as they were investigating it as a hate crime.
But their search for the truth soon spirals into something much darker.
A lot of those guys are very insecure. They want to keep it all behind closed doors.
She notified his wife about their relationship.
Just by doing that alone, it's like a target on her back.
That was the last word she said to me. If it's my time to go, it's my time to go.
He's a suspect in 2 other murders.
He's got these impulses to kill.
May 18, 2019, Dallas, Texas. In the early morning hours of this balmy Saturday, the city is beginning to stir.
Several of the city's residents were still fast asleep, but others were on their way in for early morning shifts at their jobs.
And Dallas police are already hard at work.
Dallas is a big metropolitan city, so you see it all. You see everything from, your little crimes and traffic stops to your big murders. It's just a big metropolitan city up there with New York and every other big city.
At 6:40 a.m., a 911 call comes in that will send this casual Saturday into overdrive.
Oh my God! Dallas 911.
A woman made a terrifying discovery as she was driving into work.
It's a dead body on Ferguson. It's a lady. Oh my goodness! Somebody killed somebody. She dead.
Dallas investigators are immediately dispatched to the scene.
I got the call early in the morning, pull up to the scene. It's a semi-secluded area, as secluded as you can get for the middle of Dallas. Her body is just there on the ground, kind of up against the curb.
It looks like she's been shot multiple times in the head. Detectives find a spent 9mm shell case nearby.
Shortly thereafter, investigators locate an even more unsettling piece of evidence.
There's a used condom right next to her.
Which now makes them think, are they dealing with a sex crime?
CSI collects the evidence from the crime scene to send off for testing.
Once they identify some suspects, they can test their DNA against the DNA from the used condom to see if it's a match.
But first, they need to identify their victim.
She didn't have any ID on her, no property, no nothing. And when that happens, without knowing who a victim is in any case, you almost can't even start. You can kind of start playing around with missing persons reports and stuff like that and just seeing if there's anybody that kind of fits the description, but nothing's immediately jumping out. So we have to wait till fingerprints are done at the autopsy.
Detectives have to wait another 24 hours before the autopsy results arrive.
We don't find out who she is till the next morning.
The young woman is 22-year-old Malaysia Booker.
A lifelong resident of Dallas, Malaysia Booker was an avid social butterfly known for her humor and steadfast beliefs.
Malaysia was known by her friends as having a big personality. She was very likable. She was also a person that didn't take anything off of anyone.
Malaysia was filled with a strong sense of justice. She was inclined to always speak her truth, no matter what the consequences were.
As a young transgender woman, Malaysia had experienced many struggles in her journey to acceptance.
Malaysia grew up in a Christian home, a big Christian family. She found it very hard to live her truth of who she was.
It wasn't until Malaysia entered her late teens that she finally started coming into her own.
She became more outgoing, hanging around different people, more outspoken, more open with her lifestyle now.
It seemed like she had come out of her shell, and she was finally able to be herself. She was filled with joy and energy, and she was moving forward with that.
Amidst this new chapter in Malaysia's life, she was also on the lookout for love.
Love is something everyone wants, and Malaysia was no exception. But finding the love of your life when you are trans is a struggle all on its own.
Dating while trans is horrible because you meet a guy and if he don't know what's up, you know, he want to love you, wine you, and dine you. But if you do tell him up front, he completely treats you like a sex object, don't want to take you in public. You never know what you're going to run into.
But despite her dating struggles, Malaysia eventually found a man that seemed to accept her for exactly who she was.
Hey, baby.
Hey. Malaysia had a new boyfriend.
He was a truck driver, so he'd be in and out of town for days or weeks at a time. But the two of them really made an effort to see one another.
I'm so glad you're back. I missed you. I missed you too.
It seemed like after all the struggles she had been going through, she was finally out in the world, publicly living her best life.
But now Malaysia has been identified as the mysterious Jane Doe, who was found shot to death in a remote area of East Dallas.
Because of the used condom located at the crime scene, police believe this was a sexually motivated crime.
But besides the evidence that police find, there's not much that they can go on.
There were no witnesses. There were no cameras. They were having a very difficult time trying to piece together what had happened to her.
So detectives turn to the World Wide Web.
We start kind of doing research on her, and that's when we find out about the previous assault.
Just 1 month before her death, Malaysia was brutally beaten and ended up in the hospital. Did they come back to finish what they started?
By the summer of 2019, 22-year-old Malaysia Booker was finally coming into her own.
She was dating a guy who really seemed to embrace her new identity as a trans woman.
It was just the beginning for Malaysia. She had the whole world ahead of her. She was 4 years old in trans years. She was a baby, and she had a long life to live.
But on May 18th, Malaysia has been found shot to death on Dallas's east side. And investigators soon learn this wasn't the first bout of violence she'd recently faced.
We start kind of doing research on her, and that's when we find out about the previous assault.
On April 12th, Malaysia was involved in an altercation after a minor fender bender in an apartment complex in South Dallas.
She accidentally hit someone's car.
Several men got out of the vehicle and actually attacked her and could tell that she was transgender.
And the whole thing was caught on tape.
There were a lot of slurs of all sorts of kinds that were being shouted in her direction during the course of this assault.
They beat her so bad, she went unconscious. She ends up in the hospital with a concussion, brutally beat, and she had a fractured wrist.
While Malaysia recovered in the hospital, the video of her assault went viral.
I hate that it happened to her, but I'm glad that the world saw it. Because when the world sees it, you know, it makes them think twice. If the world don't see it, they won't do anything about it. It's like the saying, out of sight, out of mind.
It was shown all across the country, and it made headlines in the media. And the FBI had to get involved as they were investigating it as a hate crime. And there was one arrest.
Charles Quinn, the driver of the other vehicle that Malaysia hit, was charged with aggravated assault.
Following the incident, Malaysia's spirit remained strong.
At the end of April, she attended a rally where she called for justice for what had happened to her and for the transgender community at large.
For her to go through such a horrific moment in her life and to come out and to talk about it, to try to save other trans women's lives is amazing. We need to let the world know that we're here, we're not going anywhere.
Transgender advocates across the country now begin to rally behind Malaysia, and she starts attracting a lot of attention online on social media.
With Malaysia's newfound publicity, it raises even more questions for investigators.
With all the attention that Malaysia is getting, police wonder if this could be someone coming for her for a hate crime.
Or could one of the men involved in her previous attack have tracked her down and finished what they started?
Detectives' first step to finding out is looking into the man charged with Malaysia's assault, Charles Quinn.
It turns out Charles Quinn had a lengthy criminal record, which included a burglary and possession of a firearm by a felon.
But what's most alarming of all is what they discover next.
When they check Charles Quinn's status, they find that he has posted bond and he's out of jail.
And Malaysia was going to go into court and testify against him in her assault trial.
It's a coincidence detectives can't ignore.
He had the opportunity and the motive to murder Malaysia.
Malaysia's testimony in his pending court case could send him to prison for years.
We knew that was one of the angles we had to look at, was just to see if it was any sort of retaliation.
But when questioned by police, Charles denies any involvement in Malaysia's death.
Wait. I know how this looks, but I had nothing to do with this. I swear, I didn't kill her.
And you don't know who did?
No, not at all.
As the investigators begin to dig even deeper, that investigation quickly runs out of steam.
Even though he had been bailed out, he was required to wear an ankle monitor. And we know those ankle monitors provide us with GPS information.
We were able to verify that he wasn't there, and we were able to verify to just kind of shore up that it wasn't anybody else affiliated with him. So it was almost immediately ruled out.
In their search for new leads, detectives turn to Malaysia's loved ones.
We go talk to the family, and really at that time, that's going to be our best lead, talking to the family. But they were upset, obviously. Nobody wants to hear that their child got murdered.
They are completely devastated. They just can't even imagine why someone would do this to her and that she is no longer here.
However, Malaysia's family is still able to fill detectives in on some vital information.
Malaysia Booker had kind of gotten onto hard times in this period.
They told the detectives that Malaysia was struggling to make ends meet, so much so that she was even living in a hotel.
She didn't want any help from anybody, and she just wanted to prove she could make life on her own.
And what's even more concerning is how Malaysia had been earning a living.
She's been escorting and doing sex work, all of this just to try to pay her bills.
Did Malaysia's new profession lead to her death?
In speaking with family members of murder victim Malaysia Booker, detectives have just learned she had recently started working as an escort on the streets of Dallas.
Sometimes trans women go down the wrong road because they're not accepted in places like the job workforce and things like that. We have to eat. We have to keep a roof over our heads.
Now investigators are wondering, did Malaysia's new profession lead to her death?
It's a very dangerous lifestyle. You don't know if your Johns are ex-felons or if they're drug addicts or married or anything like that. You're really just taking a chance on the activities that could occur.
There was a used condom found near her body. So was Malaysia killed by a John?
As detectives begin trying to answer that question, they receive an influx of tips in the case.
It became a very high-profile deal as a result of her being in this other assault, and the video of that had gone internationally viral. So there was the flood of information that we were collecting from every source that we can.
But while sorting through the sea of tips, one call gives investigators hope of finally making headway.
Hey, I got information. It said that you had information.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I'm just sitting in my car.
Of all of the dozens and dozens and dozens of outside information, there was really only one, and that was somebody calling in saying, hey, this is the last person that we know of that she was with.
The tipster says Malaysia was last seen with her close friend, Malcolm Irving.
He was with Malaysia an hour or hour and a half before she died.
Detectives don't waste any time. They give Malcolm a call.
Hey, this is Detective Gross with Dallas PD.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Hey, I guess you and Malaysia are real close?
Yes, sir.
Malcolm admits he picked Malaysia up at the hotel where she was living in the early hours of May 18th.
I got off work at 12, maybe about 12:30 at night.
Okay.
Made it to her room around 12:45, 12:50. And Malaysia was at the room. We didn't leave back out of her room until like almost 2 a.m.
Okay.
That's when she finally got dressed and finally got ready. So I seen her, I talked to her, we laughed, we joked with each other all the way up until I dropped her off.
He said he gave her a ride to the area that she normally liked to work, the corner of Lego and Spring.
She was over off of Lego on Friday night?
Yeah, I dropped her off around 2:30 that morning.
That area was actually one of my beats when I was in patrol. So I was already very familiar with that area in the first place. There's also a frequent amount of transgender prostitution in that area.
And also, that was just a couple of miles from where her body was actually found.
Before Malcolm left Malaysia that night, he says a wave of fear came over him.
He was kind of concerned. Maybe it's gut feeling, maybe he's just worried about his friend, and he shared that with Malaysia.
And I asked her, I mean, are you protected out here? Are you safe out here? Do you have anything on your purse to make sure that you're going to be okay? She just grabbed my face, kissed me on my cheek, told me, Daddy, I love you. And she says, you didn't have no weapon.
Okay.
She said, Daddy, you know, I'm going to be okay. If it's my time to go, then it's my time to go. Don't you worry. That was the last words she said to me. Daddy, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go.
Malcolm said that was the last time he saw Malaysia, and he has no idea what happened to her after he dropped her off.
There's none of the other girls out there that you're cool with that might talk to me about who they saw her leave with or anything like that?
No, sir, because when I dropped her off, wasn't nobody out there.
Okay, so you don't know where she went?
No. I don't know what people would take her to or where they pick her up at or anything.
However, according to Malcolm, there's one more thing investigators should know about Malaysia.
Malcolm tells investigators that Malaysia recently started dating someone, but he doesn't know his name.
What Malcolm does know is that Malaysia's new boyfriend had been violent towards her.
A couple of months earlier, he had beaten her up and pistol whipped her.
Can get her in the face with a gun, but her face open.
Okay, and she didn't make a report about that?
No, I don't think the report was made.
Hoping for more information on her mysterious boyfriend, detectives speak with another close friend of Malaysia's named Cedric York.
Cedric seems to know a little bit more about Malaysia's relationship with this guy.
I know she was going back and forth between this truck driver that she had been sneaking and dating with.
Cedric says part of the reason Malaysia was so secretive about her new boyfriend is because he was married.
I guess he has a wife or whatever. I guess he's supposed to be straight, Della or whatever. And he was sneaking and messing with her.
But Malaysia refused to be kept a secret.
She notified his wife about their relationship, and he was not happy about that.
Dallas detectives investigating the murder of 22-year-old trans activist Malaysia Booker have just learned some unsettling information about her mysterious boyfriend.
None of her friends seem to know this guy's name, but they do know he was violent with her, and he was also married.
But nobody knows anything about him, like where he grew up, nobody's met him, but nobody knows his Facebook, anything like that.
No, because I had tried to ask her, like, do you know his number? I heard some stuff, she was just, there's a lot of stuff that she was hiding, like, she wasn't hearing about it.
When it comes to dating trans women or hooking up with trans women, a lot of those guys are very insecure. They want to keep it all behind closed doors. But you're doing this because you're attracted to this. And you're not brave enough to love that woman out loud.
Cedric says Malaysia was done living in the shadows, and she wanted out.
So Malaysia notified his wife about their relationship.
Malaysia blew up the whole relationship, and he was very upset about that.
He starts stalking Malaysia. He's calling her. He's making threats that he's going to kill her.
Cedric goes on to reveal one more concerning piece of information to investigators.
I've been calling her mom, and I'm thinking that he has her mom because he keeps answering it.
Okay, I mean, do you know the person's voice that's answering it?
It's a guy's voice.
Detectives now believe Malaysia's phone will lead them to her killer.
They immediately file a subpoena for her phone records.
And as they wait for the phone records to come in,
hey, come over here and check this out.
They obtain another crucial piece of evidence.
Detectives are able to get their hands on some surveillance footage from a building near the intersection of Spring and Lego Street, where Malcolm says he dropped Malaysia off. They're looking for any sign of who she may have left with.
And they get lucky. They find surveillance video showing her getting into a light tan vehicle around 3:25 a.m.
And that was about 2 hours prior to her body being discovered on the side of the road.
So we were pretty sure that was going to be the suspect, whoever had that vehicle.
However, tracking down the owner of the vehicle will be easier said than done.
There were some details about it that we couldn't make out, and we couldn't associate that vehicle to anybody.
They can't see the license plate. They can't see the driver.
But on May 21st, Malaysia's phone records finally come in, and what detectives uncover gives them a glimmer of hope.
Once we finally get these phone records coming back, we're able to locate the phone. Now we just have to go figure out who's holding the phone.
They see that it's pinging off in an abandoned building, so that's where they head.
When police first arrive at the location, there's no one in sight.
So they dial the number from Malaysia's phone. And they can hear her phone ringing in the distance.
Seconds later, a young man emerges from the building.
Ho! Hands up! Whoa, 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 whoa. Hands up.
The ringing gets louder, and it's clear this man has Malaysia's phone.
Also, they noticed that he has clothing stained with what appears to be blood.
Police immediately take him into custody.
All right, don't move. Hands back.
Back at the station, detectives begin questioning their new suspect, Noah Thorne.
But when detectives ask him about Malaysia Booker, he says that he doesn't know anything.
What kind of vehicle do you drive?
I'll drive anything. I'm homeless.
Noah says he's been living on the streets.
How did you find this cell phone?
He said that he had gotten the phone from another homeless friend of his and he kept it, but didn't know what the phone had been through or that it was possibly involved in a murder.
That really explains who it was that Malaysia's friends and family were hearing when they called the phone. It was the homeless man.
However, investigators aren't sure that they can trust Noah's account just yet.
And how did you get that on your shirt?
Oh, this? Got into a fight with some guy who was trying to steal my lunch.
There's blood on his shirt. So they do DNA testing, and what they find is that the blood does not match Malaysia's, and that his DNA actually doesn't match the condom DNA that is found at the crime scene.
It doesn't look like he's their guy after all.
Desperate for answers, detectives turn back to the GPS records from Malaysia's phone.
We know that the phone right after the scene had fled. It had made this weird little loop around the city, kind of stay stationary.
They find that this phone sat in the West Dallas area near McBroom Street.
Based on how long it stayed there, we're thinking the suspect might live in that area.
And when police search the area, they're in luck.
They did observe a vehicle that matched the description and the color of the vehicle that Malaysia was last seen getting into.
This time, they're able to get a license plate number.
They run the plate, and it comes back to 34-year-old Kendrell Lyles.
But that's not all.
Kendrell is currently in jail. He's a suspect in 2 other murders.
After tracking the movements of 22-year-old murder victim Malaysia Booker's phone, Dallas police have made a vital discovery.
They located the same vehicle Malaysia was seen getting into before she was killed, and they traced it to a 34-year-old man named Kendrell Lyles.
But what's even more surprising is where Kendrell is now.
Kendrell is currently in jail. He's a suspect in 2 other murders. Both murders took place just 1 week after Malaysia was killed.
The chaos began on the evening of May 22nd in the nearby jurisdiction of Collin County.
Around 9:30 p.m., police report to a shooting at an apartment complex in the northern outskirts of Dallas.
There, they find 35-year-old Letitia Grant shot in the head.
She's transported to the hospital and unfortunately passes away when she arrives.
Then, just 24 hours later, a shooting occurred just half a mile from the first one.
This time, the victim was 29-year-old Kenneth Shikaki. He was found shot in the parking lot of an auto parts store.
It didn't take long for Collin County Police to zero in on Kendrell as the main suspect in both crimes.
Witnesses came forward tying Kendrell Lyles to both shootings.
Witnesses believe Kenneth's murder was due to some sort of drug deal gone wrong, but no one knows why Kendrell shot Letitia.
Letitia was a friend of his, and then he didn't know Kenneth before the incident.
Now, the detectives investigating Malaysia's death move Kendrell to the top of their suspect list.
having someone that comes up as a suspect in 3 murders, to most people that sounds insane. Those are usually affiliated with gang crimes and things of that nature.
But detectives need more proof to pin Malaysia's murder on Kendrell.
What they decide to do is they decide to go back to where Malaysia was last seen and start asking questions.
Do you recognize this man?
Yeah.
Based on what they learned from other escorts, detectives don't believe Kendrell is the mysterious married man Malaysia was dating around the time of her death.
Instead, he was one of her Johns. He was someone well known to the escorts in the area.
Yeah, he's a regular around here, actually.
We realized, hey, Kendrell is in the area a lot, and it was not uncommon for him to get a transgender prostitute.
He was always at that location, drinking, picking up women, and hanging around there. Detectives found out that Kendrell went by a alias name and nickname of Mississippi.
They described Kendrell pretty well to a T, and we're like, oh, yep, we're definitely on the right track.
But according to the informants, Mississippi's behavior wasn't always so innocuous.
Hey, girl, let me get a taste.
Excuse me?
Come on, girl.
Hey, if you want some, you have to pay.
Mississippi, at one point, was noted getting into an altercation and became very angry, and actually got into a physical altercation with one of the escorts at the location.
When he didn't get his way, he brutally beat her, and people were witness to this crime.
He just kind of went a little wild. From what we knew of was the first really violent assault. You know, she survived, but her assault was pretty severe.
And when detectives pull Kendrell's phone records, they discover even more incriminating evidence tying him to Malaysia's murder.
On the night Malaysia was killed, Kendrell's phone GPS mirrors hers.
That phone was in his possession as he was driving to the area where Malaysia's body was discovered.
But the final nail in the coffin comes back in the form of DNA results.
Dallas police were able to obtain a sample of Kendrell's DNA from their counterparts in Collin County and compare it to DNA found at the scene of Malaysia's murder.
It's a match. His DNA actually matches the condom DNA.
At that point, yeah, it's unquestionable that he was at the scene. I confirmed his DNA is at the scene, as well as his phone records are at the scene. I mean, all of that together, like for my case, that's perfect. We know we got the right person. It's all him.
Now there's just one piece of the puzzle left. Kendrell's confession.
So detectives went to Collin County and interviewed him.
It was purely at that point just trying to get his version of what happened, his statement about what happened, purely for the question, why?
Tell us what happened on the morning of May 18th.
They give him all of the evidence that they have stacked against him in this case. And surprisingly, he does admit to picking Malaysia up.
Yeah, I picked her up. So what?
Unfortunately, though, that's all Kendrell admits to.
He gives some very general, vague details where it's not even enough for me to discern whether he's talking about the initial assault that was prior to Malaysia's or if he was talking about Malaysia's murder.
You killed her, Kendrell. You shot her 3 times.
Nah, that wasn't me.
He absolutely refuses to acknowledge that he murdered anyone, and of course, he doesn't give any inclination as to what the motive would be regarding her murder.
It was not a very lengthy interview. He just denied overall, and then he terminated the interview.
Yeah, I'm done talking to y'all. Take me back to my cell.
Even though he is not admitting to this murder, the evidence points in his direction. The DNA, the fact that they know he picked up Malaysia, the fact that his car matches.
They had enough information to go ahead and charge Kendrell with the murder of Malaysia.
But without a confession, seeking justice for Malaysia will be no easy task.
The jury is going to want answers. They still want to figure out how did this happen and why did it happen.
Dallas police investigating the murder of 22-year-old trans activist Malaysia Booker have just charged 34-year-old Kendrell Lyles with the crime.
Kendrell is refusing to confess to the crime, so investigators are still trying to figure out why he did it. The jury is going to want answers.
Investigators have an idea from the surveillance and the telephone records that Malaysia was picked up on May 18th, 2019 at 3:25 a.m. between Spring and Lego Street.
Hey, want to go have some fun?
Get in.
She got in the car with Kendrell, thinking he was just another John, not realizing how dangerous he really was.
From there, they traveled to a secluded area in East Dallas to have sex.
But after they have sex and Kendrell tosses the condom out of the car, something went wrong.
I don't know whether they just had an argument over price, whether he just got mad over something else, whether he snapped. The only person that could tell me why is Kendrell.
I think him being scared to be outed caused her death. And it's sad. It's horrible.
Either way, he wound up drawing his gun and shooting Malaysia 3 times in the head and neck.
After Malaysia is dead, he tries to continue on with his life as if nothing has happened.
This man went on about his business while Malaysia is laying there. Like, how can you sleep at night knowing that you just murdered this lady for no reason?
But that wouldn't be the end for Kendrell's horrific crime spree.
A few days later, his violent impulses overpowered him, and he killed 2 more times. And this time, he would claim the lives of Kenneth and Letitia.
If it were not for the diligent work of the Texas police force, it seems like he would have killed again.
Now behind bars, the only thing left for Kendrell Lyles to contend with is the Texas Criminal Court.
With 3 murder charges, Kendrell now faces possibility of the death penalty in Texas.
When presented with the prosecution's case, Kendrell can finally see the writing on the wall.
He doesn't want to take his chances with a jury trial, so he wants to go ahead and try to plea with the prosecution.
In exchange for pleading guilty to all 3 murders, Kendrell is sentenced to just 48 years in prison.
Now, his release date will be 2068, and he will be approximately 82 years old.
It's essentially a life sentence, but is it enough? That's still up for debate.
The reality is, in 2068, you will have a killer back on the street. It's really a scary, scary thought.
If he's got these impulses to kill, I don't know if that would necessarily go away in 48 years.
But for now, Malaysia's life stands as a testament to the strength of a woman battling against all odds.
Being able to mold her energy, her love of this trans community in Dallas, it was a beacon of light. It was that hope that she was giving people out there, and it made it all more devastating when she was lost.
But I really don't think we would know that much about her had it not been for the fact that her beating, her terrible, horrific beating, took place on camera, and it went viral.
That's the only reason that anybody showed any interest in this case. If that had not been the case, there would not have been this flood of information, and she wouldn't be remembered by anybody other than me and her family.
I think it exposed the inner demons that are really living and breathing and walking around out there It tells you something very dark and disturbing in our communities.
We all are given our choice of how we want to live out our life, and we all need to give each other respect for our humanity.
We need more trans activists out there in the streets, on TV, up in Congress, up in that White House. You know, we need to be visible. We're not hurting nobody. We just want to live our life.
Before sunrise, schools are supposed to be quiet places. Hallways wait in darkness. Athletic fields sit empty beneath cold morning air. Parking lots belong only to custodians and the occasional early arriving teacher. They are places where another ordinary day is about to begin. On the morning of December 14th, still 1991, that expectation was shattered outside Thomas Jefferson High School in Federal Way, Washington. Before students filled the campus, before the first bell rang, before anyone realized that history was about to mark this community forever, a 17-year-old girl was found dead just steps away from the school she had planned to attend that morning. Within hours, the peaceful suburb south of Seattle would become the center of one of Washington State's most haunting unsolved murder investigations. The victim was Sarah Yarborough. She was 17 years old. To those who knew her, she was much more than the name that would later appear in newspaper headlines. Friends remembered her as kind and dependable. Family members described a teenager looking forward to adulthood, balancing school, friendships, and the ordinary concerns shared by countless young people approaching graduation. Like every family preparing for another weekend in December, no one imagined those ordinary routines would end in unimaginable tragedy. Federal Way in the early 1990s was a growing suburban community. Families moved there seeking quieter neighborhoods while remaining close to Seattle and Tacoma. Children walked to school. Neighbors recognized one another. High school sporting events brought people together on Friday nights. Violent crime was not unknown, but murders involving teenagers, especially on school property, were exceptionally rare. That reality made what happened on December 14th even more disturbing. Sarah had planned to participate in activities connected to her school's drill team. She left home expecting to return later that day. She never did. Instead, sometime before daylight, she was attacked near Thomas Jefferson High School. When her body was discovered on campus, investigators immediately understood they were dealing with an extraordinarily violent crime. Detectives secured the area, preventing contamination of what would become one of the most significant crime scenes in Washington State's history. Patrol officers established a perimeter. Crime scene technicians documented every visible detail before anything was moved. Photographs captured the position of evidence exactly as it appeared. Measurements were taken with painstaking precision. Experienced investigators recognized something immediately. The killer had left behind evidence. At that moment, however, no one knew whether available technology would ever be capable of identifying the person responsible. The investigation expanded rapidly. Detectives began reconstructing Sarah's final known movements. They interviewed family members, classmates, teachers, coaches, and anyone who might have interacted with her during the previous 24 hours. Officers canvassed neighborhoods surrounding the school, asking residents whether they had seen unfamiliar vehicles, suspicious individuals, or anything unusual during the early morning hours. Most people had seen nothing. It had still been dark. Many were asleep. Others simply had no reason to notice anything unusual before dawn. As word spread through Federal Way, fear replaced routine. Parents who had previously considered the community relatively safe suddenly questioned whether their children should walk to school alone. Students gathered in small groups, struggling to understand how someone they recognized from the hallways could become the victim of such violence. The murder felt deeply personal. It had not happened in some distant city. It had happened at their school. Counselors were brought in to help students process the shock. Teachers attempted to continue classes while recognizing that concentration had become nearly impossible. Conversations that normally revolved around homework, sports, and weekend plans shifted entirely toward one frightening question: who could have done this? Investigators asked the same question. Every possible lead demanded attention. Friends were interviewed repeatedly. Recent acquaintances were identified. Anyone known to have contact with Sarah during the days leading up to her death became part of the investigative timeline. Police also examined whether the attack had been random or targeted. Did the killer know Sarah? Had she been followed? Was the crime connected to someone inside the community? Or had an unknown offender crossed paths with her by chance? In homicide investigations, the earliest days often prove decisive. Memories remain fresh. Witnesses remember details that may later fade. Surveillance technology in 1991 was limited compared to modern standards. There were no smartphones recording movements, no doorbell cameras preserving neighborhood activity. Detectives relied heavily upon interviews, physical evidence, and traditional investigative methods. Every hour mattered. As forensic specialists processed the crime scene, they collected biological evidence with extraordinary care. Clothing was preserved. Swabs were taken. Trace materials were documented and packaged according to procedures that represented the highest scientific standards available at the time. Those decisions would eventually become crucial. Not immediately. Not within weeks. Not even within years. What decades later? The first public appeals for information arrived quickly. Local television stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers published Sarah's photograph alongside requests for witnesses to contact investigators. Detectives urged anyone who had been near Thomas Jefferson High School during the early morning hours to come forward, no matter how insignificant their observations seemed. Calls began arriving. Some described unfamiliar vehicles. Others reported suspicious individuals. Many reflected understandable public anxiety rather than concrete evidence. Each lead required investigation. Detectives understood that major homicide cases often generate hundreds, sometimes thousands of tips. Most led nowhere. One may solve everything. As days turned into weeks, investigators developed and eliminated numerous leads. Individuals connected to Sarah's life voluntarily cooperated with police. Alibis were verified. Physical evidence was compared wherever possible. Detectives continued building timelines, searching for inconsistencies that might reveal the truth. Yet despite their efforts, no immediate breakthrough emerged. The investigation slowed, not because detectives stopped working, because every obvious path had been explored. The unknown offender remained unidentified. Still, one important fact separated Sarah Yarborough's case from many other unsolved murders. Investigators possessed biological evidence. In 1991, DNA technology existed, but its practical use in criminal investigations remained far more limited than it would become in later decades. Detectives recognized the potential importance of the evidence they had collected, even if contemporary science could not yet provide all the answers they desperately needed. So they preserved everything, every sample, every report, every photograph, every note. Without realizing it, they were protecting evidence for investigators who had not yet joined the police department, for scientists whose future discoveries had not yet been made, for a family that would spend decades waiting. As Christmas approached, Federal Way struggled beneath the emotional weight of the unsolved murder. Holiday decorations appeared throughout neighborhoods, but celebrations felt subdued. Sarah's classmates attended memorials instead of ordinary school events. Parents held their children a little closer. Students who had once walked across campus without concern now traveled in groups. The sense of safety had been broken. Community members organized vigils to honor Sarah's memory. Flowers accumulated near the location where she had been found. Candles flickered through cold December evenings as friends struggled to understand how someone so young could lose her life so suddenly. Investigators attended many of those gatherings quietly, not as speakers, as observers. They understood something the public often does not. Every unsolved homicide creates two parallel stories. One belongs to the victim's family. The other belongs to the detectives who promise they will keep searching. By the beginning of 1992, Sarah Yarborough's murder had become one of the region's highest-profile investigations. Detectives continued reviewing evidence, conducting interviews, and evaluating forensic possibilities. They refused to declare defeat, but they also faced an uncomfortable reality. The person responsible had disappeared. No arrest, no confession, no definitive suspect, only questions, and a carefully preserved collection of evidence waiting silently inside police storage. Evidence that seemed frustratingly incomplete in 1991. Evidence that no one yet realized would one day speak louder than any witness ever could. Part 2 follows the immediate aftermath of Sarah Yarborough's murder as investigators launch one of the largest homicide investigations in Federal Way's history. Detectives work around the clock to reconstruct Sarah's final movements, interviewing family members, friends, teachers, classmates, and members of her drill team to establish an exact timeline of her last known hours. They search for any indication that she feared someone, planned to meet anyone, or had recently experienced unusual encounters, but no clear motive or suspect emerges. At the crime scene, forensic specialists meticulously document and preserve every piece of physical evidence. Biological samples, clothing, fibers, and other trace evidence are carefully collected according to the best forensic standards available in 1991. Although DNA technology is still in its early stages, investigators recognize that preserving the evidence could prove critical in the future, even if they cannot yet fully analyze it. Meanwhile, the murder sends shockwaves through the Federal Way community. parents become fearful. Students no longer feel safe walking to school, and local media provide extensive coverage of the case. Vigils and memorials honor Sarah's memory, while public concern grows over the possibility that a dangerous offender remains at large. As news coverage expands, police receive hundreds of tips from the public. Detectives investigate reports of suspicious vehicles, unfamiliar individuals near the school, anonymous calls, and potential persons of interest. Every credible lead is pursued, alibis are verified, and numerous interviews are conducted, but each promising lead eventually reaches a dead end. Investigators also examine individuals with histories of violent or sexual offenses who may have had access to the area, yet no evidence conclusively links any suspect to the crime. The section concludes by emphasizing the limitations of forensic science in the early 1990s. Detectives possess valuable biological evidence but lack the advanced DNA technology that would later revolutionize cold case investigations. As the initial momentum of the investigation begins to fade, the killer remains unidentified. The only certainty is that crucial evidence has been preserved, quietly waiting for scientific advances that will not arrive for many years, setting the stage for the case's transformation into one of Washington State's most enduring cold cases. Part 3. Summary. A cold case begins. Part 3. Explores how the investigation gradually transitions from an active homicide inquiry into a long-term cold case. After months of intensive investigative work, detectives have exhausted every immediate lead. Hundreds of interviews have been conducted, tips have been thoroughly investigated, and potential suspects have been examined and eliminated. Yet no arrest is made. Without new witnesses or definitive forensic breakthroughs, the investigation inevitably slows, although it is never officially closed. The narrative explains the emotional toll this uncertainty takes on Sarah Yarborough's family. As weeks turn into months and then years, they continue to live with unanswered questions, hoping that each call from investigators might finally bring news. Memorials and anniversaries become painful reminders that justice remains out of reach, while Sarah's classmates move into adulthood carrying memories of the tragedy that forever changed their community. The documentary then shifts to the detectives responsible for preserving the case. Although personnel change over the years through retirements and departmental transfers, each new investigator inherits the same carefully maintained evidence, reports, photographs, and interview records. The section emphasizes that a cold case is not a forgotten case. It is an investigation waiting for new evidence or new technology capable of uncovering answers that were previously impossible to obtain. Attention then turns to the evolution of forensic science throughout the 1990s and early 2000s. DNA profiling becomes increasingly sophisticated, national DNA databases expand, and laboratories develop more sensitive methods capable of analyzing smaller biological samples. Investigators periodically review Sarah's case whenever new forensic techniques become available. But despite repeated testing and renewed efforts, the preserved DNA does not initially identify a suspect because no matching profile exists in available law enforcement databases. The section also highlights how cold case investigators continue to re-examine witness statements, revisit original investigative theories, and verify whether advances in technology or newly reported information might reopen promising avenues of inquiry. Each review demonstrates the importance of meticulous evidence preservation and documentation performed during the original investigation. Part 3 concludes with a pivotal realization. Although traditional investigative methods have reached their limits, the biological evidence collected in 1991 still holds untapped potential. Detectives recognize that the future of the case may no longer depend on finding a new eyewitness or obtaining a confession, but rather on scientific advances that have not yet been developed. The closing narration leaves viewers with a sense of cautious anticipation, suggesting that the evidence has remained silent for years, but not necessary. Part 4 marks the point where the Sarah Yarborough investigation enters a new era. Years have passed since the murder, but detectives refuse to close the file. Instead, the case becomes the responsibility of successive generations of investigators, each inheriting the same reports, photographs, witness interviews, and carefully preserved biological evidence collected in December 1991. Although the investigation has become a cold case, it is never considered forgotten. The narrative explores how homicide investigations often survive longer than the careers of the detectives who begin them. Original investigators retire, new detectives take over, and each reviews the evidence with fresh eyes. They revisit witness statements, compare old investigative theories, and re-examine physical evidence whenever advances in forensic science make additional testing possible. Despite these repeated efforts, no suspect can yet be conclusively identified because the DNA profile recovered from the crime scene does not match anyone in available law enforcement databases. The section then shifts to the rapid evolution of forensic DNA technology during the late 1990s and early 2000s. Laboratories develop increasingly sensitive techniques capable of extracting more information from older biological samples. National DNA databases expand, allowing investigators to compare evidence against growing collections of offender profiles. Detectives repeatedly submit Sarah's evidence for additional analysis whenever new technology becomes available, hoping that each scientific advance might finally produce the breakthrough they have been waiting for. Yet every comparison ends the same way. There is still no match. Attention then turns to the emotional impact of the passing years. Sarah's family continues to mark birthdays, holidays, and anniversaries without answers, while classmates grow into adulthood carrying memories of the tragedy that changed their community. The investigation remains active behind the scenes, but from the public's perspective, the case appears to have faded from view. The contrast between public silence and continued investigative effort becomes a central theme. The summary also emphasizes one of the investigation's most important lessons: the value of evidence preservation. Detectives recognize that the biological evidence collected in 1991 may become more valuable as science continues to advance. Rather than viewing the absence of a DNA match as failure, they understand it as a limitation of existing technology. The evidence has not lost its significance. It is simply waiting for methods that do not yet exist. Part 4 concludes with a pivotal realization. Investigators begin looking beyond traditional database searches toward emerging forensic techniques that could identify an unknown suspect even without a direct DNA match. This shift lays the groundwork for the next phase of the investigation, where advances in investigative genetic genealogy will eventually transform a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 3 decades into one of Washington State's most significant cold case breakthroughs. Part 5 marks the turning point in the Sarah Yarborough investigation, when detectives begin using a revolutionary investigative technique that did not exist when the murder occurred: investigative genetic genealogy. By the late 2010s, after decades of unsuccessful database searches, investigators recognized that the preserved DNA evidence still holds the key to identifying the killer. The obstacle is no longer the quality of the evidence, it is the absence of a direct match in traditional law enforcement DNA databases. Investigators therefore explore whether genealogy can generate new investigative leads by identifying biological relatives of the unknown contributor through publicly available genealogy databases used with appropriate legal and ethical safeguards. The narrative explains that genetic genealogy does not identify a suspect by itself. Instead, forensic genealogists analyze distant familial DNA connections and construct extensive family trees that can span multiple generations. Beginning with relatives who may share only small amounts of DNA with the unknown individual, researchers systematically eliminate family branches through historical records, census information, birth and death certificates, marriage records, military records, and other public documents. The process is slow, meticulous, and requires months of research before investigators can narrow their focus to a small number of individuals. As detectives and genealogists continue their work, one family line begins attracting increasing attention. Investigators compare ages, locations, and life histories of potential candidates against the known facts of Sarah Yarborough's murder. They look for individuals who were old enough to have committed the crime, who had connections to the Federal Way area in late 1991, and whose circumstances are consistent with the available evidence. Importantly, genealogy provides only investigative direction. Every hypothesis must still be confirmed through conventional police work and forensic testing. Once investigators identify a promising individual, they begin a traditional criminal investigation. Detectives review historical records, reconstruct the person's movements, examine past addresses, employment history, and known connections to the region, and determine whether the individual could realistically have been present near Thomas Jefferson High School at the time of Sarah's murder. Surveillance and additional investigative steps are undertaken as permitted by law. The focus remains on gathering evidence independently of the genealogical research before any arrest decision is considered. The summary then explains the crucial forensic confirmation stage. Detectives obtain a DNA sample associated with the identified suspect through lawful investigative methods. That sample is submitted to an accredited forensic laboratory, where scientists conduct a direct comparison between the suspect's DNA profile and the biological evidence preserved from the 1991 crime scene. Unlike genealogy, this comparison follows long-established forensic DNA procedures routinely accepted in criminal courts. The laboratory concludes that the DNA profiles are consistent with the same individual, providing investigators with the evidence needed to move the case forward. The section also reflects on the extraordinary significance of the breakthrough. The same biological evidence collected in December 1991, carefully preserved despite the technological limitations of the era, has finally produced the answer investigators sought for nearly 30 years. The breakthrough is presented not as a miracle, but as the result of decades of evidence preservation, scientific advancement, and persistent investigative work. Part 5 closes with mounting tension. For the first time since Sarah Yarborough's murder, investigators believe they know the identity of the man responsible. Yet one critical step remains before the public learns his name. Detectives must complete the final phase of the investigation, secure the necessary legal approvals, and prepare for an arrest that will bring one of Washington State's longest-running homicide investigations into an entirely new chapter. Part 5 begins as investigators move from years of uncertainty to their first truly promising lead in nearly 3 decades. After exhaustive work using investigative genetic genealogy, detectives narrow the search to a single family line. Months of genealogical research, combined with traditional detective work, gradually reduce a large pool of possible relatives to one individual whose age, history, and connection to the Federal Way area are consistent with the evidence collected in 1991. The investigation shifts from searching for an unknown offender to carefully building a case around a specific suspect. The narrative emphasizes that detectives do not immediately make an arrest after genealogy identifies a potential suspect. Instead, they treat the genealogical findings as an investigative lead. They independently verify the suspect's background, reconstruct his whereabouts during the period of Sarah Yarborough's murder, review historical records, and compare every available fact against the original investigative file. Detectives revisit reports written decades earlier, searching for details that may now carry new significance in light of the emerging identification. Once investigators are satisfied that the suspect warrants further investigation, they obtain a DNA sample through lawful investigative methods. The sample is submitted to a forensic laboratory where scientists perform a direct comparison with the biological evidence preserved from the crime scene in December 1991. Unlike investigative genealogy, which only points investigators toward possible relatives, this comparison uses established forensic DNA testing that has long been accepted in criminal courts. The laboratory concludes that the DNA from the suspect matches the biological profile recovered from Sarah Yarborough's homicide, giving investigators the scientific confirmation they have pursued for decades. With the forensic evidence confirmed, detectives begin preparing for the next stage of the case. They organize decades of investigative records, laboratory reports, and witness information into a comprehensive prosecution file. Prosecutors review the evidence to ensure that the case can withstand judicial scrutiny despite the passage of nearly 30 years. Every document, chain of custody record, and forensic procedure is carefully examined because cold case prosecutions require exceptional attention to detail. The section also explores the emotional impact on those who have carried the investigation across generations. Original detectives who worked the case in the early 1990s learned that the evidence they painstakingly preserved has finally produced an answer. Newer investigators recognize that they are completing work begun by officers who may have long since retired. The case becomes a powerful example of how homicide investigations often extend beyond individual careers, with each generation contributing to the eventual resolution. For Sarah Yarborough's family, investigators finally prepared to deliver the news they had waited decades to hear. While no arrest can undo the loss they experienced in 1991, identifying a suspect replaces years of uncertainty with a tangible path toward accountability. The investigation, once defined by unanswered questions, is now supported by modern forensic evidence. Part 5 concludes as detectives finalize plans to arrest the suspect and formally present the case to prosecutors. After nearly 30 years of silence, scientific advances and persistent investigative work have transformed one of Washington State's most enduring cold cases into an active homicide prosecution, setting the stage for the arrest and court proceedings that follow. Part 6 begins with the moment investigators have pursued since December 1991. After decades of unanswered questions, detectives moved to arrest the man identified through the combined use of investigative genetic genealogy, traditional detective work, and direct forensic DNA comparison. The arrest marks the first major break in the Sarah Yarborough homicide investigation since the crime occurred, transforming one of Washington State's longest-running cold cases into an active criminal prosecution. The narrative emphasizes that the arrest is not the result of a sudden breakthrough, but the culmination of nearly 30 years of meticulous work. Detectives explain that the DNA evidence preserved at the original crime scene remained the foundation of the investigation throughout every stage. Advances in forensic science allowed investigators to revisit evidence collected in 1991, while investigative genetic genealogy provided the lead that ultimately focused attention on a single suspect. The decisive step came when a direct forensic DNA comparison confirmed that the suspect's DNA matched the biological evidence preserved from Sarah Yarborough's murder. Following the arrest, prosecutors formally charged the suspect with Sarah Yarborough's murder. The section explains that prosecutors spend months reviewing decades of investigative records, forensic reports, and witness information before filing charges. Cold case prosecutions require especially careful preparation because evidence collected many years earlier must still meet modern legal standards. Investigators and prosecutors therefore verify chain of custody records, laboratory procedures, and documentation from every stage of the investigation. News of the arrest quickly spreads throughout Washington state and beyond. For many residents of Federal Way, the announcement is almost unbelievable. Some community members vividly remember the fear that followed Sarah's murder in 1991, while younger generations know the case only through news reports and anniversary stories. The arrest renews public interest in the investigation and highlights the growing role of forensic DNA and genetic genealogy in solving decades-old homicides. The summary also explores the emotional response of Sarah Yarborough's family. Nearly 30 years after losing Sarah, they finally learned that investigators have identified and charged a suspect. While no prosecution can erase decades of grief, The arrest represents the first meaningful step toward accountability. Family members publicly acknowledge the persistence of the detectives, forensic scientists, and prosecutors who refuse to let the case remain unsolved. Attention then turns to the broader significance of the case within law enforcement. Detectives across the country view the investigation as another demonstration that properly preserved biological evidence can retain enormous value even after decades. The case reinforces the importance of evidence preservation, periodic cold case reviews, and continued investment in advanced forensic technology. It also illustrates that investigative genetic genealogy serves as an investigative lead rather than courtroom proof, with traditional forensic DNA testing providing the evidentiary foundation for criminal charges. Part 6 concludes as the criminal justice process formally begins. The investigation that once depended on unanswered questions now enters the courtroom, where prosecutors must present decades of evidence to a jury. After nearly 30 years, the focus shifts from identifying a suspect to proving the case beyond a reasonable doubt, setting the stage for the trial and the legal examination of one of Washington State's most significant cold case investigations. Part 7 shifts from the investigation to the courtroom, where prosecutors begin presenting the evidence gathered over more than 3 decades. The focus is no longer on discovering the identity of Sarah Yarborough's killer, but on demonstrating, through admissible evidence, that the state has proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. The proceedings underscore the unique challenges of prosecuting a homicide committed in 1991 using evidence preserved for over 30 years. The prosecution starts by introducing Sarah Yarborough as a person rather than simply a victim. Jurors hear about her life, her family, and the events leading up to the morning of December 14th, SIL 1991. Detectives reconstruct the timeline of her final known movements and explain how the original investigation unfolded immediately after her body was discovered near Thomas Jefferson High School. Crime scene photographs, investigative reports, and witness testimony establish the factual foundation of the case. The narrative then turns to the forensic evidence. Expert witnesses explain how biological evidence collected in 1991 was preserved according to accepted standards, allowing it to remain suitable for modern DNA testing decades later. The prosecution carefully distinguishes between investigative genetic genealogy, which generated an investigative lead, and the direct forensic DNA comparison, which provided the evidentiary basis for identifying the suspect. Scientists describe laboratory procedures, quality control measures, and the chain of custody that protected the integrity of the evidence over the years. Defense attorneys challenge aspects of the prosecution's case, particularly the difficulties inherent in a decades-old investigation. They question the reliability of memories after so many years, examine the handling of evidence, and scrutinize the investigative process. The summary notes that such challenges are a normal and essential part of criminal proceedings and should not be interpreted as evidence of guilt or innocence. The court evaluates these issues through testimony, documentary evidence, and legal argument. The section also highlights the emotional impact of the trial on Sarah's family. For many relatives, returning to the events of December 1991 is deeply painful. Photographs, testimony, and forensic evidence revisit a tragedy they have carried for decades. At the same time, the courtroom represents something they had long hoped to see: the opportunity for the evidence to be heard and examined in a public legal forum. Beyond the individual case, the trial attracts national attention because it illustrates how advances in forensic science have transformed cold case investigations. Detectives, prosecutors, and forensic scientists from other jurisdictions closely follow the proceedings, recognizing that the methods used in Sarah Yarborough's case may have implications for other unsolved homicides involving preserved biological evidence. Part 7 concludes as both sides continue presenting their cases and the legal process moves toward its final stages. After decades of investigation, the responsibility for evaluating the evidence now rests with the court, marking the transition from scientific discovery to judicial determination. Part 8 examines the broader meaning of the Sarah Yarborough case beyond the courtroom. By this stage, the investigation has become more than the story of a single homicide. It has become a landmark example of how persistence, evidence preservation, and advances in forensic science can transform an investigation that once appeared impossible to solve. The section reflects on the extraordinary journey from a dark December morning in 1991 to a prosecution built on scientific techniques that did not exist when the crime occurred. The narrative explores the emotional impact on Sarah Yarborough's family after decades of uncertainty. While the legal proceedings cannot undo the loss they suffered, they provide something that had been missing for more than 30 years: answers. The family no longer has to wonder whether investigators will ever identify a suspect. Instead, the focus shifts to the judicial process and the hope that the evidence will ultimately be evaluated in court. The section emphasizes that for many families of homicide victims, certainty itself can be an important form of justice, even after many years. Attention then turns to the detectives who work the case across multiple generations. The summary highlights how no single investigator solved the murder alone. Original detectives secured the crime scene and preserved evidence. Successive investigators maintained the case file, revisited old leads, and submitted evidence for new forensic testing as technology evolved. Cold case specialists later combined those decades of investigative work with emerging DNA techniques, demonstrating that successful long-term investigations often depend on the cumulative efforts of many professionals rather than a single breakthrough. The section also examines the case's significance within modern forensic science. Sarah Yarborough's investigation reinforces the importance of preserving biological evidence even when existing technology cannot fully analyze it. The same evidence collected in 1991 remains scientifically valuable decades later because investigators carefully documented and protected it. The summary explains that this principle has influenced how many law enforcement agencies manage evidence in serious violent crimes, recognizing that future scientific advances may reveal information unavailable at the time of the original investigation. Another major theme is the role of investigative genetic genealogy in contemporary criminal investigations. The case demonstrates how genealogy can generate investigative leads when traditional DNA database searches fail. while also emphasizing that genealogy itself does not establish criminal responsibility. Instead, any lead must be independently confirmed through conventional forensic DNA analysis and other investigative methods before charges can be supported. This distinction has become a central principle in the responsible use of genetic genealogy in criminal investigations. The narrative then broadens to the national impact of cold case investigations. Law enforcement agencies across the United States increasingly review unsolved homicides involving preserved biological evidence, encouraged by cases such as Sarah Yarborough's that demonstrate the potential of new forensic technologies. Detectives recognize that although not every cold case can be solved, each preserved evidence file represents another opportunity for future scientific advances to uncover the truth. Part 8 concludes on a reflective note. Sarah Yarborough's case stands as a reminder that justice is not measured solely by how quickly it arrives. Sometimes the truth remains hidden for decades, waiting for science, persistence, and careful investigative work to converge. The investigation shows that while time may complicate the search for answers, it does not necessarily erase the possibility of accountability, leaving a lasting legacy for investigators, forensic scientists, and families still waiting for answers in other unsolved cases. Part 9 examines the lasting impact of the Sarah Yarborough investigation on modern homicide investigations, forensic science, and the families of victims whose cases remain unsolved. By the time the case reaches this stage, it has become more than a decades-old murder investigation. It serves as an example of how perseverance, scientific innovation, and careful evidence preservation can fundamentally change the outcome of a cold case once believed unlikely to be solved. The narrative begins by revisiting one of the investigation's defining themes, the importance of preserving evidence. Detectives explain that every biological sample collected in December 1991 was treated as though it might one day answer questions that contemporary science could not. The summary emphasizes that the evidence itself did not change over the years. Rather, the technology available to analyze it became increasingly sophisticated. This distinction illustrates why evidence preservation remains one of the most important responsibilities in homicide investigations. The section then explores how advances in DNA analysis transformed the investigative landscape. Techniques that were unavailable in the early 1990s eventually allowed forensic scientists to obtain more detailed genetic information from preserved biological samples. Investigative genetic genealogy expanded those possibilities by helping detectives identify previously unknown suspects through distant biological relatives. While direct forensic DNA testing continued to provide the evidentiary confirmation required for criminal proceedings, Sarah Yarborough's case demonstrates how multiple scientific disciplines can work together within established legal procedures to reopen long unsolved investigations. Attention shifts to the broader law enforcement community, where the investigation becomes an important teaching example. Police agencies increasingly invest in dedicated cold case units, evidence preservation programs, and partnerships with forensic laboratories. Investigators recognize that properly stored evidence may retain its value for decades, allowing future generations of detectives to revisit cases using methods unavailable at the time of the original investigation. The case reinforces the principle that an unsolved homicide should remain open to new scientific opportunities rather than being regarded as permanently beyond resolution. The summary also considers the emotional significance of the case for Sarah Yarborough's family and the Federal Way community. While no investigation can restore the life that was lost, identifying a suspect after more than 30 years demonstrates that continued investigative effort can still produce meaningful answers. For other families living with unresolved homicides, the case becomes a source of cautious hope that advances in forensic science may eventually provide breakthroughs in their own loved ones' cases. The narrative further reflects on the collaborative nature of successful cold case investigations. Original detectives, evidence technicians, forensic scientists, genealogists, prosecutors, and later investigators all contributed to the eventual progress of the case. No single discovery solved the investigation in isolation. Instead, decades of careful work by multiple generations of professionals gradually built the foundation upon which later scientific advances could succeed. Part 9 concludes by emphasizing that Sarah Yarborough's investigation represents more than the resolution of a single cold case. It illustrates an enduring principle of modern criminal investigation. Time may complicate the search for truth, but it does not necessarily eliminate it. As forensic science continues to evolve, the case stands as a reminder that evidence carefully preserved today may become the key to justice many years in the future, inspiring investigators to continue examining unsolved crimes with patience, scientific rigor, and the belief that even the oldest mysteries may someday yield answers. Part 10 broadens the focus from the Sarah Yarborough investigation itself to the lasting lessons it provides for modern homicide investigations. The case is presented as an example of how criminal investigations can span generations, with each new development building upon work completed decades earlier. Although the crime occurred in 1991, its eventual progress depended on the foresight of the original investigators who carefully documented the crime scene and preserved biological evidence long before modern forensic techniques were available. The narrative begins by examining the role of evidence preservation. Crime scene investigators in 1991 could not have predicted the capabilities of 21st century DNA technology, yet their careful handling of biological evidence ensured that later forensic scientists would have material suitable for advanced analysis. The section explains that this principle has become central to modern homicide investigations. Evidence should always be collected and stored with the expectation that future scientific advances may reveal information that current technology cannot. The summary then explores how cold case investigations have evolved within law enforcement. Many agencies now maintain specialized cold case units that periodically review unsolved homicides whenever new forensic methods emerge. Detectives emphasize that revisiting older investigations is not merely a matter of rereading case files, but of reevaluating evidence using technologies unavailable during the original inquiry. Sarah Yarborough's case illustrates how such periodic reviews can eventually produce significant investigative breakthroughs. Attention shifts to the role of interdisciplinary collaboration. The the investigation required the combined efforts of patrol officers, homicide detectives, crime scene technicians, forensic laboratory scientists, investigative genealogists, prosecutors, and victim advocates. The summary highlights that no single profession solved the case independently. Instead, each discipline contributed expertise at different stages of the investigation, demonstrating how complex cold case prosecutions depend upon coordinated work across multiple areas of criminal justice. The section also discusses the ethical and legal considerations surrounding investigative genetic genealogy. Sarah Yarborough's case demonstrates that genealogy functions as an investigative tool rather than definitive courtroom evidence. Once genealogy identified a potential suspect, detectives still had to corroborate that led through conventional investigative methods and direct forensic DNA comparison before prosecutors could proceed. This distinction has become an important safeguard in the responsible use of emerging forensic technologies. The narrative then reflects on the enduring impact of the case for families of homicide victims. Sarah's investigation shows that the passage of time does not necessarily end the search for accountability. Although decades may separate a crime from its eventual prosecution, continued evidence preservation and scientific progress can still offer opportunities for justice. For families living with unresolved cases, the investigation provides cautious optimism that advances in forensic science may eventually reopen paths that once appeared closed. Finally, the summary considers the legacy of the case within forensic education and law enforcement training. Sarah Yarborough's investigation has become an example of why meticulous documentation, strict chain of custody procedures, and long-term evidence preservation remain essential in every homicide investigation. Detectives and forensic scientists increasingly recognize that evidence collected today may ultimately be interpreted using technologies that have yet to be invented. Part 10 concludes by emphasizing a central theme that has guided the investigation from beginning to end. While time can complicate a criminal investigation, it does not erase the value of carefully preserved evidence. Sarah Yarborough's case demonstrates that patience, scientific advancement, and sustained investigative commitment can together reshape the future of cold case investigations, offering valuable lessons for generations of investigators yet to come. Part 11 shifts away from the technical aspects of the investigation to examine the human consequences of an unsolved homicide. While forensic breakthroughs and investigative milestones define the public narrative, the section emphasizes that Sarah Yarborough's family, friends, classmates, and the Federal Way community lived with uncertainty for more than 3 decades. The investigation is presented not only as a criminal case, but also as a story of lives permanently altered by violence and by the long wait for answers. The narrative begins by reflecting on the emotional burden carried by Sarah's family. Years passed without knowing who was responsible for her murder or whether the case would ever be solved. Birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, and family milestones became reminders of the absence left by Sarah's death. Although investigators continued working behind the scenes, the family experienced long periods in which there were few public developments, making the uncertainty itself one of the most difficult aspects of the case. The summary then explores the perspective of investigators who inherited the case over successive generations. Detectives who joined the investigation decades after the murder often found themselves studying reports written long before they began their careers. They reviewed preserved evidence, retraced earlier investigative decisions, and sought to understand the reasoning behind each step taken in 1991. The section highlights how cold case investigations frequently depend on continuity between generations of investigators, each building upon the work of those who came before. Attention turns to the role of forensic science in sustaining hope. Throughout the years, improvements in DNA analysis encouraged detectives to revisit Sarah Yarborough's case whenever new techniques became available. Although many rounds of testing produced no immediate identification, each advance reinforced the belief that preserved biological evidence might eventually reveal answers unavailable to earlier investigators. The case demonstrates that scientific progress often occurs gradually rather than through a single dramatic discovery. The narrative also considers the wider impact on the Federal Way community. Sarah's murder remained part of the city's collective memory long after the initial investigation faded from daily headlines. Community members who remembered the events of December 1991 continued to follow developments as the case evolved, while younger residents came to know the investigation through anniversary coverage and public appeals. The eventual identification of a suspect renewed public attention to a crime that had shaped local history for decades. The summary further discusses how the case influenced conversations about cold case investigations nationwide. Law enforcement agencies increasingly recognized that the emotional needs of victims' families extend far beyond the early stages of an investigation. Regular communication, continued evidence review, and long-term commitment became increasingly important elements of cold case practice. Sarah Yarborough's case illustrated that maintaining investigative momentum, even during periods without public breakthroughs, can preserve opportunities for future progress. Another major theme is the enduring value of patience. Detectives understood that solving a decades-old homicide rarely depends on a single witness or confession. Instead, success often results from persistent evidence preservation, careful documentation, periodic case review, and scientific advances that gradually expand investigative possibilities. Sarah's case demonstrates that patience in criminal investigation is not passive waiting, but continuous preparation for future opportunities. Part 11 concludes by reflecting on the broader significance of Sarah Yarborough's story. Beyond its forensic and legal importance, the case serves as a reminder that every cold case represents a person whose life was interrupted and a family whose search for answers continues. The investigation underscores that justice may take many years to pursue, but the commitment to seek the truth can endure across generations, sustained by dedicated investigators, advancing science, and families who never stop hoping for answers. Part 12 examines how the Sarah Yarborough investigation has influenced modern cold case practices and why it continues to be studied by investigators, forensic scientists, and prosecutors. The focus shifts from the individual homicide to the broader evolution of criminal investigation, showing how one preserved evidence file became an example of what can be achieved through long-term commitment, scientific advancement, and interagency cooperation. The narrative begins by emphasizing that the case was solved not through chance, but through preparation. Detectives in 1991 carefully documented the crime scene, preserved biological evidence, and maintained detailed investigative records despite having no way of knowing what future forensic science would make possible. Their work demonstrates an enduring principle of homicide investigation. Evidence should always be collected and preserved with future technologies in mind, even when current methods cannot fully analyze it. The section then explores the transformation of forensic DNA analysis over the 3 decades following Sarah's murder. What began as relatively limited DNA profiling gradually evolved into highly sensitive testing methods capable of generating detailed genetic information from preserved biological evidence. These scientific advances, combined with investigative genetic genealogy, created investigative opportunities that simply did not exist in the early 1990s. Sarah Yarborough's case illustrates how scientific progress can reopen investigations long after traditional leads have been exhausted. Attention turns to the collaborative nature of successful cold case investigations. The summary explains that resolving complex cases requires the coordinated efforts of numerous professionals, including crime scene investigators, forensic laboratory scientists, homicide detectives, investigative genealogists, prosecutors, victim advocates, and evidence custodians. Each contributed expertise at different stages of the investigation, demonstrating that cold case resolutions are often the product of sustained teamwork rather than individual accomplishment. The narrative also highlights the importance of maintaining public confidence in emerging forensic techniques. Investigative genetic genealogy is presented as an investigative tool that generates leads, not as a substitute for traditional evidence. Detectives must still corroborate genealogical findings through independent investigation and direct forensic DNA comparison before pursuing criminal charges. This careful approach helps ensure that scientific innovation is applied within established legal and ethical frameworks. Another major theme is the educational value of the case. Police academies, forensic science programs, and homicide investigators increasingly use examples like Sarah Yarborough's investigation to illustrate best practices in evidence preservation, chain of custody procedures, and long-term investigative planning. The case reinforces the idea that every crime scene may ultimately be interpreted using technologies that have not yet been invented, making careful documentation and preservation essential responsibilities from the very beginning of an investigation. The summary then broadens its perspective to other unsolved homicides. Across the United States, law enforcement agencies continue reviewing older cases involving preserved biological evidence, encouraged by the success of investigations like Sarah Yarborough's. While not every cold case can be solved, the case demonstrates that advances in forensic science can create meaningful opportunities to revisit evidence once thought incapable of identifying an offender. It also underscores the importance of maintaining evidence storage systems that preserve biological material for future analysis. Part 12 concludes by emphasizing the enduring legacy of Sarah Yarborough's case. Beyond its legal significance, The investigation serves as a powerful reminder that truth can survive the passage of time when evidence is preserved with care and investigators remain committed to pursuing answers. The case stands as an example of how scientific progress, professional persistence, and careful investigative practice can together reshape the future of cold case investigations, offering hope that other long unsolved crimes may one day be resolved through the same combination of patience and innovation. Part 13 reflects on the enduring legacy of the Sarah Yarborough investigation, examining what the case means beyond the courtroom and why it continues to resonate with investigators, forensic scientists, victims' families, and the public, rather than focusing solely on the resolution of one homicide. The section considers how the case has influenced the broader philosophy of cold case investigations. That time may delay justice, but it does not necessarily prevent it. The narrative begins by revisiting one of the investigation's central lessons. Evidence has a lifespan that can far exceed the careers of the people who collect it. The detectives who processed the crime seen in December 1991 could not have anticipated the forensic capabilities available decades later, yet their careful preservation of biological evidence ensured that future investigators would still have meaningful opportunities to pursue the case. The summary emphasizes that successful cold case investigations often begin with meticulous work performed long before the necessary technology exists. Attention then turns to the evolution of homicide investigation over the 3 decades following Sarah's murder. The case illustrates how advances in DNA analysis, evidence management, and investigative genetic genealogy have transformed the ability of law enforcement to revisit previously unsolved crimes. At the same time, it reinforces that technology alone cannot solve a homicide. Scientific advances must be supported by careful documentation, lawful investigative practices, experienced detectives, and rigorous legal review before evidence can withstand scrutiny in court. The section also highlights the importance of institutional continuity. Cold case investigations often outlast individual detectives, prosecutors, and forensic scientists. Sarah Yarborough's case demonstrates how each generation of investigators contributes to the overall progress of an investigation by preserving evidence, reviewing earlier work, and applying newly available forensic methods. The eventual breakthrough reflects decades of cumulative effort rather than the work of any single investigator. The narrative broadens to consider the impact on other families living with unresolved homicide investigations. Sarah's case has become a source of cautious optimism for those waiting many years for answers. It illustrates that even when immediate investigative leads disappear, properly preserved evidence may retain its value indefinitely. As forensic science continues to advance, older evidence can sometimes reveal information that was impossible to obtain when the crime originally occurred. The summary further discusses the influence of the case on forensic education and law enforcement training. Investigators increasingly study examples like Sarah Yarborough's to reinforce best practices in crime scene documentation, biological evidence preservation, chain of custody procedures, and multidisciplinary collaboration. The investigation demonstrates that the quality of work performed during the earliest stages of a homicide inquiry can directly affect opportunities for future scientific analysis decades later. Another important theme is the distinction between investigative persistence and certainty. Although advances in DNA technology significantly expanded investigative capabilities, detectives continue to rely on traditional investigative methods to corroborate forensic findings. The case underscores that modern homicide investigations require both scientific innovation and careful adherence to established legal standards, ensuring that evidence remains reliable throughout the judicial process. Part 13 concludes by reflecting on Sarah Yarborough's lasting place in the history of American cold case investigations. Her case stands as an example of how determination, scientific progress, and responsible investigative practice can converge across generations to produce meaningful answers after decades of uncertainty. More broadly, it reminds investigators that every carefully preserved piece of evidence represents a future opportunity, and that the search for truth does not necessarily end simply because years or even decades have passed. Part 14 serves as the closing chapter of the documentary, bringing together the investigative, scientific, and human themes that have defined Sarah Yarborough's case. Rather than ending with a single courtroom moment, the conclusion reflects on what the investigation represents after more than 3 decades, a testament to perseverance, careful evidence preservation, and the belief that the pursuit of justice can continue across generations. The narrative begins by returning to the morning of December 14th, SIL 1991, when Sarah Yarborough's life was taken outside Thomas Jefferson High School. The contrast between that tragic morning and the decades-long investigation underscores how a single act of violence can shape a family, a community, and an entire generation of investigators. While the years transformed technology, law enforcement, and forensic science, the central mission of the investigation remained unchanged: to determine who was responsible and to present reliable evidence through the justice system. The summary then revisits the most significant lesson of the case: the extraordinary importance of evidence preservation. Every biological sample, photograph, report, and chain of custody record created in 1991 became part of a foundation that future investigators could build upon. The evidence itself did not become more valuable because it aged. It became more valuable because scientific methods evolved to extract information that earlier generations could not obtain. Sarah Yarborough's investigation demonstrates why meticulous crime scene procedures remain one of the most critical responsibilities in homicide investigations. Attention shifts to the broader impact of forensic innovation. The case illustrates how advances in DNA profiling and investigative genetic genealogy have transformed the ability of law enforcement to revisit long unsolved murders. At the same time, the documentary emphasizes that these technologies function most effectively when supported by careful detective work, lawful investigative procedures, and rigorous forensic validation. Modern science expanded investigative possibilities, but it did not replace the need for thorough criminal investigation or due process. The narrative also reflects on Sarah Yarborough's family and the Federal Way community. Although no legal proceeding can reverse the events of December 1991, The investigation demonstrates that the passage of time does not diminish the importance of seeking answers. For Sarah's loved ones, decades of uncertainty eventually gave way to a renewed opportunity for accountability. For the broader community, the case became a reminder that even the oldest investigations can retain the potential for meaningful progress. Another major theme is the collaborative nature of justice. Detectives, crime scene technicians, forensic scientists, genealogists, prosecutors, evidence custodians, and victim advocates all contributed to the investigation over many years. No single breakthrough resolved the case independently. Instead, each generation preserved the opportunity for the next to continue the search, illustrating that successful cold case investigations often depend upon sustained institutional commitment rather than individual accomplishment. The documentary closes by considering the legacy Sarah Yarborough leaves within modern criminal investigation. Her case has become an example of why cold case units continue to review preserved biological evidence, why forensic laboratories invest in new analytical techniques, and why investigators remain committed to revisiting unsolved homicides whenever scientific advances create new opportunities. Across the United States, similar investigations continue because cases like Sarah's demonstrate that time alone does not erase the possibility of discovering the truth. The final reflection returns to the central idea that has guided the documentary from beginning to end. Justice is not measured solely by how quickly it arrives. Sometimes it depends on patience, scientific progress, and generations of investigators who refuse to abandon a case simply because years have passed. Sarah Yarborough's story endures not only because of the crime that claimed her life, but because it illustrates the enduring responsibility of the criminal justice system to preserve evidence, pursue the truth, and remain committed to victims and their families for as long as answers remain possible. Her case stands as a lasting reminder that while time changes investigations, communities, and technology, it does not extinguish the pursuit of justice, and that every unsolved homicide deserves the same determination to seek the truth, no matter how many years have passed.